Welcome back, deep divers. Today we're taking a plunge into a topic that's got everyone buzzing: the future of energy.
And more specifically,
We're zeroing in on those renewable solutions you're also curious about.
sounds like we've got a full plate.
Oh, we do. You guys sent in a mountain of material. Videos from Future Galaxy, TED-Ed, even documentaries from Curiosity Stream, the works. So let's roll up our sleeves and get down to it. What does a greener world really look like?
Well, it's fantastic to see this level of interest, especially at such a pivotal time for energy. The sources you've all sent paint a vivid picture of what's possible.
Absolutely. And speaking of possibilities, that Future Galaxy video about the U.S. achieving net energy gain from a fusion reaction.
Yeah.
I mean, was that as monumental as they made it sound?
Oh, it's huge. Scientifically, no doubt about it. But if we're picturing powering our homes with fusion, think more like a couple of decades down the road. Maybe 20 to 30 years.
So not exactly plugging into the sun next week.
Not quite. Scaling this technology up, making it commercially viable, it's a massive engineering challenge.
Got it. So long-term game changer, but not an instant fix. Which brings me to another big question that's been swirling around: 100% renewable energy. Is that even realistic, given where we are now? That TED-Ed video really got me thinking about that.
Well, that video hit the nail on the head when it pointed out that we actually have the technology to capture enough renewable energy.
Really? Enough to power the whole world?
From the sun, wind, you name it. We have the tech. It's not a question of if, it's more a question of how.
So it's less about inventing something brand new and more about figuring out the logistics.
Exactly. It's the implementation that gets tricky. Take cost, for example. We need to make renewable energy as cheap as fossil fuels and then improve the efficiency of how we capture and use that energy. And then there's the big one, storage. Remember that example in the video about powering a transatlantic flight with batteries?
Oh, yeah, that was wild.
They said you'd need a battery weighing over 1,000 tons.
Yeah, I don't think they make suitcases that big.
No kidding. And that brings us right to why energy storage is such a hot topic right now. That Curiosity Stream documentary really drove that point home.
Totally. We can't just rely on wind or solar 24/7, right?
Right. So how do we keep the lights on when the sun sets or the wind dies down? It's crucial.
Thinking back to those California blackouts in 2020, that's a prime example, right?
Exactly. Plenty of sunshine during the day, but as soon as solar power dipped in the evening, boom, rolling blackouts.
Not a good time.
Not at all. No one wants to repeat that.
Definitely not. But that documentary did highlight some pretty fascinating solutions. In Switzerland, for example, they're using their Lehman Dam as a massive gravity battery.
Pumped storage hydro on a grand scale.
Exactly. And then we've got those lithium-ion batteries. They're everywhere these days.
True, but limited in how much they can store long term.
Right. So what else is out there?
Well, the documentary showcased some really cool innovations. Finland, for instance, they're using sand to store heat from renewables.
Sand. Who would have thought?
I know, right? And then there's molten salt, perfect for storing heat in those concentrating solar power plants. It's like a giant thermos keeping things hot, even when the sun's not directly shining.
Pretty clever. But it seems like a lot of these solutions depend on location, wouldn't you say? What works in a sunny desert might not be ideal for a rainy coastal city.
You're absolutely right. There's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to energy storage. Each technology has its own strengths and weaknesses, and cost-effectiveness is always a key factor.
So finding the right tool for the job. Which reminds me of that AC Anona video we watched. It really opened my eyes to renewable options beyond just wind and solar. I mean, osmotic power. Generating electricity from the difference in saltiness between seawater and freshwater.
I know, it sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
It does. And wave power, harnessing the energy of ocean waves. Imagine coastal cities powered by the very sea they border.
It's incredible, isn't it? The potential is right there.
And they didn't stop there. Bioelectricity, using bacteria to generate electricity from organic waste. It's like turning trash into treasure.
Talk about resourcefulness.
Right. And then there was that truly mind-boggling concept, space-based solar power, beaming energy down from satellites. Now that's thinking outside the box.
It seems like scientists and engineers are leaving no stone unturned when it comes to finding sustainable solutions.
I love that. Okay, so before we get too lost in space, let's bring it back down to Earth and talk about hydrogen.
Hydrogen. The Bloomberg Originals video presented it as the super versatile clean fuel source.
They did, but then they threw in this whole hydrogen rainbow thing, and honestly, I got a little lost in the colors.
It can seem complicated, but really it all boils down to how the hydrogen is produced. Think of it like this. Gray, blue, and pink hydrogen, they all come from fossil fuels or nuclear power.
So not exactly the clean energy dream we're hoping for.
Not quite. They still have a carbon footprint. But then there's green hydrogen.
Okay, is that the solution we're looking for?
Green hydrogen is produced using renewable energy to split water molecules, so it's truly clean.
Sounds promising.
It is. The catch is, it's currently pretty expensive to produce on a large scale. But the good news is, that Bloomberg video highlighted some startups like H2 Pro and C0. They're working on making green and, get this, turquoise hydrogen that's made from natural gas with the carbon captured more affordable.
Interesting. So there's hope for a truly green hydrogen future. What would that look like?
Imagine industries like steel production operating without any carbon emissions.
Wait, really?
Yeah. SSA, a Swedish steel company, is already using hydrogen to decarbonize its steel-making process. It's a glimpse into what's possible.
Wow, that's encouraging. It's a perfect example of how we can use hydrogen to tackle some of the toughest challenges out there.
Yeah.
Speaking of challenges, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about wind power. That Matt Farrell YouTube video really got me thinking about the complexities of something that's often presented as a simple solution. He pointed out that wind energy comes with its own set of environmental challenges and trade-offs.
It's important to avoid simplistic thinking when it comes to energy. Wind power is a vital part of the mix, but it's not a silver bullet.
Exactly. One of the things that stuck with me was his discussion about the manufacturing and transportation of those massive wind turbine components.
Right. All those components in heavy machinery, they don't run on fairy dust.
Exactly. It takes a lot of energy to make those things, and often that energy comes from, well, fossil fuels.
It's an important consideration. We need to look at the entire life cycle of these technologies.
And then there's the issue of bird and bat fatalities.
Yes, a valid concern.
I mean, wind energy is generally considered wildlife friendly, but it's undeniable that those turbine blades can be a hazard for certain species.
Absolutely. It's a complex issue, and researchers are working on solutions like radar systems to detect birds and bats and shut down turbines when necessary.
It's a reminder that even renewable energy sources can have unintended consequences.
You're right. There's always a balance to consider.
And Matt Farrell also brought up the impact on communities.
Ah, yes. The industrialization of the countryside.
Exactly. Wind farms, especially large ones, can really change the landscape, and some people feel like their countryside is being, well, industrialized.
The visual impact is definitely a factor. And then there are the practical challenges, like what to do with those giant turbine blades at the end of their life.
Right. How do you dispose of something that big?
It's a good question. But there are some interesting developments in recycling and repurposing those blades. Some are being turned into bridges, playground equipment, even furniture.
Wow, I never would have thought of that. So even with these challenges, it seems like there's a lot of innovation happening to mitigate the downsides of wind power.
Absolutely. As technology evolves, we can expect to see even more innovative solutions.
That's great to hear. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. From fusion breakthroughs to the complexities of wind power, it's clear that the future of energy is multifaceted and constantly evolving.
We've only scratched the surface, and there's so much more to explore.
I'm ready. Where do we go next?
Well, one of the most interesting trends we're seeing is a move away from those giant power plants and towards a more decentralized energy model.
Decentralized. So instead of energy flowing from a few central hubs, it's more distributed. Kind of like how the internet went from a few big servers to everyone having their own little node in the network.
That's a great analogy, and that brings us right back to energy storage, because if everyone is generating their own power, they need a way to store it for when they need it. The BBC News report on Burlington, Vermont was a perfect example of this approach in action.
Oh yeah, Burlington. They became the first U.S. city to hit 100% renewable energy. But it wasn't just from one source, was it?
Nope. They got a mix of wind, hydro, and even a wood chip plant for backup when those renewable sources aren't cutting it.
It's like building a balanced investment portfolio, but instead of stocks and bonds, we're talking about wind turbines, solar panels, and maybe even a geothermal plant or two.
Exactly. Diversity is key. What works for one community might not be the best fit for another.
Right. Location, resources, energy needs, it all plays a role. Speaking of diverse options, that TDC video on the top 10 energy sources of the future really blew my mind.
Some of those ideas were pretty out there, weren't they?
They were. It felt like watching a science fiction movie. Algae biofuels, for example, using algae to clean wastewater and turning it into fuel.
A double win. It's a fantastic example of how sustainable solutions can address multiple problems at once.
And speaking of turning waste into something valuable, geothermal energy, using the Earth's internal heat, that's got huge potential, right?
Enormous.
They mentioned a project in Iceland where they accidentally hit a pocket of magma while drilling, and it ended up supercharging their geothermal plant.
Talk about a lucky break.
It makes you wonder what else is down there waiting to be discovered. But okay, so we've got all these amazing renewable options on the horizon. The World Economic Forum video on the future of energy brought up some important points about making this transition a reality on a global scale. What were your takeaways?
Well, they stress the need for, massive investment.
Especially in developing nations.
Exactly. Bridging that infrastructure gap is crucial. If we want everyone to have access to clean energy, we need to make sure everyone can afford it.
Makes sense.
And they talked about the importance of collaboration.
Not just between governments, but also with private companies.
Right. To speed things up, we need everyone on board working together.
It's a team effort, for sure. But they also brought up a point that often gets overlooked. The demand side of the equation. It's not just about finding new energy sources, it's about using energy more efficiently.
The greenest energy is the energy we don't use in the first place.
So being mindful of our consumption habits.
Exactly. Reducing waste is a huge piece of the puzzle.
It's like that old saying, reduce, reuse, recycle. Applies to energy too, it seems.
Absolutely.
Which brings up another point. We can't just forget about traditional energy sources overnight.
Right. We're still heavily reliant on fossil fuels. They'll be part of the mix for a while.
As we transition, at least. And that includes nuclear power, right? It's controversial, but it does have the potential to provide clean, reliable energy.
That TDC video talked about new reactor designs that are safer and more efficient. Some can even reuse existing nuclear waste.
Which would be a huge win. So it's a balancing act, reducing our reliance on fossil fuels while ramping up renewable energy and also becoming more energy efficient.
A lot to juggle. And we need to make sure energy remains affordable and accessible for everyone during this shift.
That's key. Speaking of challenges, that BBC News report on the aviation industry really highlighted the uphill battle some sectors face when it comes to decarbonizing.
Yeah, planes are pretty much stuck with jet fuel for now.
And finding a sustainable alternative isn't easy. They talked about SAF, sustainable aviation fuel.
Made from things like used cooking oil or plant material.
Right. But right now, it's limited in supply and way more expensive than traditional jet fuel.
What's hurdle?
Delta Airlines is investing heavily in SAF. But even they admit it will take time to scale up production and bring costs down.
It's a long game.
They also mentioned electric or hydrogen-powered planes.
Which are still in the early stages of development. Decarbonizing aviation isn't just about the tech.
Right. It also comes down to economics and consumer demand.
Exactly. If people aren't willing to pay a premium for sustainable air travel.
It makes it harder for airlines to justify the switch.
Exactly. But I do think there's growing awareness of the environmental impact of flying. That puts pressure on the industry to find solutions.
And that pressure is coming from investors, too.
Oh, absolutely. They're increasingly looking for companies with strong sustainability credentials.
So it's not just about regulations or technological innovation. It's about shifting market forces and consumer preferences.
It all plays a role. It's a multifaceted challenge.
Okay, so we've talked about the big picture, the global energy transition, and the challenges of decarbonizing sectors like aviation.
Yeah.
But what about everyday life? What can we do to make our homes and communities more energy efficient?
Well, that DW News video on energy storage innovations had some really cool ideas. They showed how we can use things like sand or crushed rock to store heat from renewable sources.
Oh, like that sand battery in Finland, heating that public swimming pool.
Exactly. And they featured a company called Rondo that's making heat batteries out of clay bricks. They can store heat at really hot temperatures, which makes them versatile.
It's like we're rediscovering ancient building materials and using them in cutting-edge ways.
And these innovations aren't just about reducing our reliance on fossil fuels.
It's also about making renewable energy more reliable.
Right. More accessible, too.
Because if we can store energy from sources like wind and solar, the entire grid becomes more stable.
Exactly. More resilient, too.
Yeah.
And that stability is essential as we move towards a more electrified future.
Everything running on electricity. Cars, homes, you name it. Speaking of electrification, remember that crazy idea from the TDC video about generating electricity from the air.
Air gen device?
Using a protein and the moisture in the air to create a tiny electrical current.
It sounds like science fiction, but it's real. It might be a while before we're powering our homes with it, but it shows you what's possible when we think outside the box.
It's amazing, isn't it? So we've gone from the global energy transition to small-scale solutions and even the possibility of pulling energy from the air. It's clear there's no shortage of ideas.
And that's what makes this whole exploration so exciting. We're at a turning point.
A real energy revolution. But one of the themes that keeps popping up is the importance of individual action.
We all have a part to play. Remember what the World Economic Forum video said, "The future of energy belongs to the visionaries."
It's not about waiting for someone else to fix things, it's about being part of the solution. So what can the average person do?
Well, it starts with being aware of the problem, and then looking for ways to reduce your own energy consumption.
Little things can make a difference, right?
Absolutely, like switching to LED light bulbs, using public transportation, or even just unplugging devices when you're not using them.
Simple changes, big impact.
Right. And then there's choosing renewable energy sources for your home.
If that's an option for you.
Of course. And supporting policies that promote clean energy, voting with your wallet and your vote.
It's about aligning your actions with your values.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be a huge, sweeping change.
Small steps add up.
They do. And when enough people start making those changes, that's when real change happens.
It's about creating a ripple effect.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're nearing the end of part 2 of our deep dive. But before we wrap things up, there's one more topic I want to circle back to energy justice.
Yes. A critical piece of the puzzle. We need to make sure the benefits of clean energy are shared equitably.
For everyone.
Yes. The World Economic Forum video talked about the need for inclusive financing models, making sure developing nations aren't left behind, and that certain technologies aren't excluded either.
Because it's not just about developing the technology, it's about making sure everyone has access to it.
Right. And the BBC News report on Burlington highlighted how important it is to ensure those benefits are distributed fairly within a community.
So it's not enough to just transition to clean energy. We need to do it in a way that benefits everyone, not just a select few.
A just and equitable transition.
That's the goal. A clean energy future that's fair and accessible for all. It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Sure.
That access to clean energy is so closely tied to social and economic justice. It's not just a technology issue.
Not at all. It's about creating a system that works for everyone.
A fairer system. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm wondering, where do we go from here? We've covered so much ground: fusion breakthroughs, algae biofuels, the challenges of wind power, even pulling energy from thin air. It's almost overwhelming. What does it all mean for the average person listening right now?
It means we're at a crossroads. We have the knowledge, the technology, and the momentum to build a cleaner, more sustainable future. But it won't happen overnight. It takes effort.
So we can't just sit back and wait for someone else to fix things. We have to be part of the solution ourselves.
Exactly. That World Economic Forum video said it best. The future of energy belongs to the visionaries.
The people willing to embrace change.
The ones who challenge the status quo, who speak up for a better way.
That's empowering. We're not just passengers on this ride, we're the drivers. So let me ask you, the listener, what kind of energy future do you want to see? What kind of world are we building?
As you mull over everything we've talked about today, consider what steps you can take, even small ones, to make that vision a reality.
Like what? Give us some ideas.
Well, it could be as simple as switching to a renewable energy provider, or supporting policies that encourage clean energy.
Voting for change.
Exactly. Or even just having conversations about sustainability with your friends and family, raising awareness.
Because every action, big or small, creates a ripple effect, right?
Precisely. And when enough people make those ripples, we start to see real waves of change. Remember that National Geographic video. As technology improves and renewable energy becomes more affordable, well, the solutions to climate change might be closer than we think.
It's a future worth fighting for.
And it's a fight we can win if we work together.
Well said. And remember, you don't have to figure this out alone. We've got links to all the sources we discussed, plus some additional resources in the show notes.
Keep learning, keep asking questions, stay curious.
That's it for our deep dive into the future of energy. Until next time, keep exploring. And thanks for diving deep with us.